My favorite implementing the strategy came in Module 4 when we were talking about increasing rigor. And the strategy that I wanted to delve deeper into for this project was self-regulation and characteristics of a thinking curriculum. And I used this with my Spanish 3 classroom. One day during this digital learning, I was browsing Facebook and came across some PSAs, public service announcements, that are using informal commands and also vocabulary related to health and self-care, which is exactly the topics that we were talking about in the Spanish 3 class. You could see here that on this graphic, they have bolded the different verbs in a lot of cases, and they are written in informal commands. Same thing for this graphic, it's recommendations for sleeping better, and it's using informal commands to talk about things that you could do to sleep better. And I thought that that was a really practical, easy way for students to demonstrate writing and to show a command of making different command forms in Spanish, because it's actually quite difficult and there's many different types of commands that can be formed. So I thought that this was a great way to get students to be creative while demonstrating knowledge of a new grammatical and vocabulary concept that we were learning in class. So the strategy I focused on was self-regulation. Self-regulation is basically allowing students to be independent in their practice, to employ it automatically, and to transfer their learning to new learning activities. So that's basically what they're doing with learning commands and then seeing them used in a public service announcement, and then they get to make their own public service announcement. Also, we have increased rigor through this project because we are presenting content that's related to broad-based issues, themes, or problems. It's multiple disciplines that are being addressed in this assignment, and it allows for the depth of learning to go deeper or shallower depending on the need of the student. Also, students had to be very self-directed in this. They were using the online lessons, but I was also available for office hours while they were creating this assignment. It's also an open-ended task because students really could make any PSA that they wanted to talk about. It didn't necessarily have to be about health-related vocabulary. They were able to use prior knowledge and vocabulary in order to make their own PSA. And then it also integrates both basic skills and higher level thinking skills into the curriculum. So when I talk about the checklist of characteristics, there was this chart on page, I believe, 139 of Advancing Differentiation. And I felt like this creation of a PSA mostly went in the This Is Us category. So the learning goals are well articulated. Students must use commands informally. Essential questions are worth investigating. So it could be health related as we're going through the coronavirus. And digital learning, a lot of my students chose to write guides for how to be successful in the digital learning environment. The concepts are clearly defined. We did that by, basically just saying you have to use informal commands to give people information about whatever topic you want to do. The activities are designed to move the learner toward independence. Absolutely. They had a lesson that they had to go through, then they had some practice that they did independently. They received answers to that so that they could get feedback. And then this was kind of our culminating activity where they were able to create their own public service announcement. The activities build student confidence. So just like we talked about, we went through the different steps for how I was scaffolding the activities. And then at the end, they were able to produce their own unique creation. It is interdisciplinary because I allowed them to choose to do a PSA on whatever topic they wanted. It was emotionally engaging because they were able to talk about whatever it was they wanted. Okay. Situations involve ambiguity. Like I said, I didn't really know what I was going to get from kids. I got to see their creativity there. Provocative issues are raised. I could absolutely see using this in my Spanish 5 and AP classes on topics such as like the care of the environment, civil rights, justice issues, even like how-to guides for relationships, things like that. There's always room for additional questions and deeper investigations, so they could expand upon their commands, like they could talk about why they feel like this should be a rule or this is something that should be followed. The content's relevant to learners. We already talked about that. They had a lot of choice The project is authentic. The two PSAs that I found were from authentic Spanish news sources. And so they see them all the time in social media, so they got to make their own. And then assessments and evaluations are designed to provide learners with quality feedback. I was able to give feedback on the students' use of commands, and it was great. And then students were able to self-reflect based on the feedback that they received from me. As far as this fitting in Bloom's taxonomy, this is, I would say, at the very tip top where they're creating. Basically, they are formulating their own public service announcements that they are designing and assembling. It should be visually interesting, and it should visually represent the different commands that they are using. Here are some student samples. One student decided to do protection against coronavirus, so she said things like stay at home, wash your hands with soap frequently, avoid contact with the elderly, clean your phone, keyboard, mouse, and computer, and do exercise, but be careful. And then the second student, wanted to talk about how to do school at your house. So she says things like be concentrated, don't use your phone, make a routine, stay positive, listen to your teachers, and don't start your homework late in the day. So there were various levels of difficulty that we could put, and then feedback. This one over here on the left was almost completely perfect, I'd say. And then this one, she did not use her negative commands properly. She did really well with the affirmative commands. She missed an accent there, but that's okay. So I could see what parts of the commands they were gaining really deep knowledge of and which ones we needed to review again. I also provided this as like a deeper sample. So this is 6 pieces of advice to have success on an online course. And so you have the main command here that's in bold, and then they go into further, deeper explanation for why that's important or why that piece of advice should be followed. Practical ways to differentiate this particular assignment. You could do all kinds of stuff with it. You could focus on just regular verbs for your lower students. For those that need more of a challenge, you could focus on irregular verbs. They can go deeper in their explanations. You could use it for both affirmative and negative commands. And then Spanish has different audiences. You could have informal commands versus, someone that you want to show respect to formally, or when you want to boss multiple people around, like a whole class worth of kids. And then also you can use previously learned vocabulary or newly acquired ones from previous units. And then it also gives students a choice of their topic for their PSA. In order to connect it to content, just being a Spanish teacher, I think you could use these commands and PSAs in the following units. Anything that has to do with safety, health, and wellness, household chores and responsibilities. You could use this in a food unit where you're making recipes and preparing food. You could talk about environmental conservation, any kind of a how-to video you could do, even if it's like just showing people how to do Dia de los Muertos makeup. It could literally be anything. Civil rights, procedures, and relationship advice. Those are just some things off the top of my head that I thought it'd be used for. I really like the strategy because students had a lot of choice and how they were going to demonstrate using commands. And it was really easy to differentiate up or down. So I could see definitely using this in the classroom. And I was able to see what was important to students because, based on whatever they chose. And I was able to see their creative side come through because they were able to put graphics and things with that. And I could see this even expanding it further in my classroom by using things like Pictograph and Piktochart and other online resources. So that's my presentation. Thanks.